All right. Mungkin está live di Facebook. Okay, nanti coba cek YouTube lokwi. All right, we are live on YouTube too, Biba. All right, here we are. Let's get started. Half a day todos sam seguena hudzong. Este un otro episode, a special episode. Sama sucede este domingo. This is a special Sunday episode of Fanachu. Half a day to everyone who is watching and listening. I am once again your host, Michael Lujan Bavacqua, and I am here with and I'm joined today here on Fanachu by two members of the group Famalao'an Rights, who are going to be talking about women's reproductive issues, women's reproductive rights, a recent bill that was introduced in Guam, and also a demonstration that is coming up next week. And so we've got a lot to talk about, some very critical conversations that need to happen. And so I'm so glad that I have two members of Famalao'an Rights who are here with me now to talk about it. Now, before we get to our guests, though, I wanted to just share, if you are not familiar with it yet, where is that? If you are not familiar with it, Bill 291. Bill 291 is something which a lot of people, of course, are worried about, and it's important that we frame the conversation in certain ways. Bill 291 is called, of course, the Heartbeat Act of Guam. And so I know that some of you will have questions about sort of what does this have to do with abortion? What does this have to do with women's rights? I've heard a lot of different people describing this through misinformation or misunderstandings about issues. And I'm so glad that we have Kiana and we have Stephanie here from Famalao'an Rights who can, help clarify some of these issues and help us understand why it's an important issue. And so Kiana and Stephanie, thank you so much for joining. And let's actually get started with this conversation. What is Bill, actually first, if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about what Famalao'an Rights is as a group, and then also what is Bill 291-36?
Yeah, sure thing. So Famalao'an Rights is a reproductive justice initiative that is focused on addressing the need for accessible reproductive health care and education in Guam. It's a group that's currently made up of a bunch of local women, and some of us are scattered throughout Hawaii, New York. And for the most part right now, we're just doing an educational social media campaign. You may have seen our graphics floating around. You may have seen you've seen me doing Famalao'an talks. The one with the governor was one of our most popular ones, where we brought her on last year for Women's Month. But in light of recent events, and then since Bill 291 has been introduced, we've been in collaboration with Guam People for Choice, which is a coalition of a bunch of different women, a bunch of different organizations, people like Attorney Anita Areola, Director Jane Flores, Attorney Vanessa Williams, and a bunch of different doctors. And since being in collaboration with them, they have kind of helped us to plan to extend our services beyond just educational social media. We plan to extend Famalao'an Rights services to things like voter registration drives, holding more rallies for choice, and then eventually getting reproductive health care here to Guam, and further things beyond that. And I think one of the most important parts of Famalao'an Rights is that, we used to say that we're kind of Guam's first and kind of only reproductive justice initiative, but that's really not the case. We're just the latest, right? We've seen since the 80s that women like Anita Areola, even the governor, were protesting for the right to reproductive health care. And so we're kind of just continuing that fight and continuing that legacy and trying to get accessible reproductive health care here, get people educated about reproductive health care here. And so that's essentially what we're doing now as Famalao'an Rights.
Sidus Masti, and then Stephanie, did you want to add in?
So just going on to what Key said, you know, we, like she mentioned, we thought we were the first, but we're definitely not. We're the latest. Honestly, since the introduction of the bill, we have awakened a sleeping dragon. Director Jane Flores, Attorney Nita Arriola, Governor Leon Guerrero, they really started this fight back in the 80s and the 90s. And so now we're seeing a new generation of women come out, and it's such an exciting time because we're in solidarity with a lot of our allies. We have a lot of LGBTQ allies, queer allies as well. And so this is something that is refreshing to see, and we're here, and we're here to fight for reproductive rights for our island.
And I think I'm sorry, the second part of your question was what is Bill 291, right? And kind of what are its implications for the island of Guam. And so just in summary, Bill 291 is also known as the Guam Heartbeat Act of 2022. And essentially what it does is it prohibits doctors from performing abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected. And there are very, very few exceptions made for medical emergencies where a pregnant woman could lose her life or her health would be severely impaired. And the bill would give private citizens the right to file a civil lawsuit with either the Superior Court of Guam or the District Court of Guam against anyone that performs or induces an abortion after a heartbeat has been detected, with the minimum lawsuit being $10,000. And I guess what we're here to discuss today is why is it bad for Guam? So firstly, it's bad for women in general because the average time it takes for a heartbeat to form in a fetus and to be detected is about 5 to 6 weeks. And some women don't find out they're pregnant until anywhere between 4 to 7. So if you find out you're pregnant after that window, then you won't be able to get, a legal abortion, and the physician that would do that abortion could be sued. Not that you're able to get a legal abortion here anyway, but the point still stands. The bill claims that it's about choosing life, when really that's not the case. It's really about finding some kind of new way to control the bodies of women and control the bodies of people who can get pregnant. Jane Flores said in one of her letters that this bill is somewhat of an election scheme. And, that's true. But I think the introduction of this bill in the year 2022, where so many other jurisdictions have access to reproductive health care, is very telling that Guam still stigmatizes abortion and reproductive health care. And it creates a narrative that paints abortions and reproductive health care as morally wrong, right? We make women feel guilty about having abortions. There have been policies that scare them into not having abortions via a lot of different means. And the government comes out with policies like Bill 291 to further these feelings and to further this narrative. And it's simply not right. And, Guam has a history of suppressing the right to reproductive health care. At one point in history, we had the most restrictive abortion laws throughout the entire United States. And we're also a predominantly Catholic island. So something like Bill 291 isn't new. It's really just adding to the same narrative that has always been around. And the conversation has always been so one-sided. And what we need to do is we need to stop looking at reproductive health care as a moral issue, but rather as a basic human right. So that's the gist of Bill 291.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And we've already have some questions coming in from people. And in fact, Kevin Camacho, of course, is asking if we will have proponents of Bill 291 on this episode. And if anyone who is supportive of 291 is interested in talking about the issue, we can schedule a future episode for it. But I think it's important to frame this issue in certain ways, right? That you know, people may have a strong cultural feeling or a strong religious feeling about something, but should sort of your religious feelings or your cultural feelings about something, should that then override sort of the rights or the feelings of others? And so that's one thing that I notice in a lot of these discussions, is that people are trying to, and anyway, so, but I am open to talking about it though. I am open to talking about it though. For me personally, as somebody who grew up not Catholic, but as Seventh-day Adventist, and read the Bible a lot, like for school and then personally, it was one thing that was always frustrating for me in the abortion debate is a lot of people grounding this in religious history and belief, when the Bible says almost nothing about abortion. And in fact, you can't really even argue that there's something strong in it. And the Catholic Church itself wasn't really strong on abortion until much more recently. And so for me, it's very hypocritical to argue that this is some sacred issue for Catholics or for the church or for religious people, because in truth, historically, and if you read the Bible and you're actually familiar with it, it's not. It's not. And so, but I don't. If either of you feel like responding to that point, you can. But I just did want to let people know that if somebody wants to talk about it from a perspective of why we should support 291, then yeah. And I'm happy to sort of open up a space for that. But you have to, for me, you always have to be careful about how you frame it. If you're going to frame it like what Kiana was mentioning, that sort of it's this immoral thing, like people who have babies should be held responsible for it. I don't necessarily think that that's progress, or that's a great way to approach society, because that's how people, especially women, but ethnic groups, minorities, have been disempowered throughout history, is that you basically hold them accountable in these extra ways to keep them down. And so if people are going to argue that, then I don't know if Fanachu is a great space for that. But anyways, so one thing that I wanted to ask you though, because Kiana, you mentioned the issue of sort of the heartbeat. Is there something scientifically misleading about the way some proponents of Bill 291, or sort of these fetal heartbeat, is there something misleading about it? Because I don't get the sense like they're telling the whole story. I think it's more like a pulling on people's emotions as opposed to something rooted in science.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think what the heartbeat part of the bill in the name, the Heartbeat Act of 2022, what it does is it creates sympathy for a fetus. The idea that there is some helpless person in the womb with a heartbeat that could possibly be aborted, that could possibly be killed. It's a direct attempt to tug on the heartstrings of the public. I mean, they could have easily, very, very easily named this bill the Anti-Abortion Act of 2022 or the Controlling Women's Bodies Act of 2022. But when you hear that, it doesn't really have that great a ring to it. No one wants to feel like they're controlling women's bodies. No one wants to feel like, they're limiting access to reproductive health care. But you hear that buzzword, heartbeat, and people feel inclined to feel sympathy, not for the mother, but for the fetus. And that's why it's become so problematic. Scientifically, I already talked about how, a heartbeat is detected around 5 to 6 weeks, and women sometimes don't find out they're pregnant until around 4 to 7. But I won't speak too much of the science, because I am not a medical doctor, and I know there's a lot of debate as to whether or not fetuses are humans, but I also won't get too much into that. But essentially, that's what the Heartbeat Act, that name, does. Is it's an attempt to bring in voters or bring in certain groups of people, to pull them in and to kind of create that divide in our community, like Director Flores said in her letter. And so that's very problematic.
Stephanie, did you want to add in anything into that?
Yeah, kind of like what he mentioned earlier, that this bill really does aim to tug at the heartstrings of the public and to create this narrative that, we do have to protect the unborn child or the fetus. But really, I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, what about the mother? How are we protecting the mother? And truthfully, it's concerning that the senators made absolutely no exceptions for victims of sexual assault, where we see on the news so many times we have young girls, young individuals being sexually assaulted. And I remember seeing one of them how that a victim as young as 12 years old became pregnant as became pregnant as a result of their attack. And so if this bill was implemented, then we're sentencing these 12, 13, 14-year-old victims a horrendous 40 weeks of a constant reminder of their attack. Additionally, this bill infringes on our rights as women. And in the press conference, the senator cited that this is a preventative measure, but it's infringing on our right to bodily autonomy, to self-determination, and it just limits our rights as women. But our senators need to understand that they're not banning abortion. They're actually banning access to safe and legal abortions. If this bill was implemented, then women are going to resort back to unsafe, back alley abortions, with coat hangers, with knitting needles, and that's not what we want as a community. We don't want our women to go out and again, if they're very determined to not be pregnant anymore, then they're going to explore every avenue to have an abortion on her own. And so that can lead to, gosh, again, I'm not a doctor as well, but the studies and what I've been hearing from the Guam People for Choice, it's really disheartening to know. And Dr. Magette, you talked about how like the cultural and the religious, again, around this abortion. And so it's honestly, truthfully, it's a lot of debate, right? This is something that has caused debate within families even rift apart because of it, because we are predominantly Catholic, right? And this is something that no one really likes to discuss. It's always like a taboo topic. It's more of the behind the closed door, don't ask, don't tell. But having access to abortion and other reproductive health care is not a cultural or a religious debate. It is important for the health of our community. Having access to abortion protects our women from financial disadvantages, as sometimes they won't have the means to have a child. And we've heard in the conversation before that, well, there's always adoption, which is again a valid thing, but have we seen the numbers in Guam of how many foster kids are still in the system that are pending a placement? The numbers are just astronomical, right? So in addition, women who do receive abortions, they're less likely to suffer from mental health problems compared to those who were denied that access. What else did I want to talk about? And just kind of bringing it back to the cultural sense, right? Guam, we are a matriarchal society. The Chamorro culture is a matriarchal society, right? We get our lineage from our mothers, and the fact that we're not allowing our mothers, our women, or our future mothers to make these decisions for themselves, that is just a major disrespect to women, as a whole, because they're trying to regulate our bodies when hundreds and thousands of years ago, women was the one that was like running the show. We were the ones that were providing for the family and everything. And so this is just something that, yes, we recognize that there is a rift between this, but if the viewers today can take anything away from this, it would to be that this is not a cultural debate. This is not a religious debate. This is a debate about getting access, getting reproductive health care to our island.
Again, definitely. I think, and so I do want to build off of what you were sharing there, because the cultural debate around it can be very fierce. And I remember this even from when my mom, who is Chamorro and who was a nurse, she was the president of the Guam Nurses Association at that time, and Lou Leon Guerrero later came as the president of the Guam Nurses Association. And this was in the early 90s when Guam had the most restrictive abortion law in the United States and its territories. And there was fierce debates about should the Nurses Association even take a position on something like this. And it tended to go down cultural, ethnic lines, is that from the way that my mom described it, if most of the Filipina nurses were against abortion and against choice, almost all of the white nurses were pro-choice, and then the Chamorro women were divided between those who felt more that it should be a woman's choice and those who felt culturally it's against. But I always want to remind people, of course, that if going off of what Stephanie was mentioning, if you go back, and people have asked me this all the time, what would ancient Chamorros or Chamorros prior to colonization felt about this issue? And in almost all cultures, of course, abortion is usually something unfortunate, but sometimes it's stigmatized, sometimes it's not stigmatized. But I feel that given what we know about sort of the matrilineal nature of society, Chamorro women would have been empowered to make this choice, because the Spanish are very clear. What the priests hated about Chamorro culture, one of the things they really hated was that women could make decisions over men. And for the Catholic religion at that time, a woman should not tell a man what to do about anything. A man has to be in charge. And just as God is supposed to be male, lording over everything, a man has to be in charge of everything and a woman underneath. And so when the priest saw that a woman got to make the ultimate decision about what happened with the children, what happened in the house, and also about her own body. What the priests say that Chamorro women had the ability, of course, to have relationships with whoever they wanted to, whereas men were not allowed that sort of privilege. And so if you ask me what ancient Chamorro philosophy would have been on this, of course it's unfortunate. Abortion is unfortunate, but the woman would have been empowered to make the decision based on her family, and so on. That's my belief, looking at everything that I know, everything that I've read. But then, of course, Catholicism comes in, and Chamorro identity changes a lot under Catholicism, and the sense of what a Chamorro woman is changes as well. And so, but I wanted to build off of what you were sharing there, because as somebody who studies the culture, people ask me all the time, and they say, "Isn't abortion against our culture?" And I say, well, no, not necessarily. If it's the woman who's in charge of her body, then no, it's not. It just depends on what you believe about a woman's role in society. Do you think that she should have that choice, or do you think that a priest or a husband or a father or the family should make the choice instead? And so, but yes, and we've got some lively comments and debates. People sort of already putting out their opinions, and I appreciate everybody who's sort of sharing their thoughts for or against sort of the discussion so far. But I do want to bring this up because it was being mentioned in both the comments and in the discussion. The PDN had an editorial: do more for lives outside the womb before stoking the flames of moralistic debates. And so, of course, the PDN is taking that position, which is very, very important, is that if you really pro-life, if you believe in a culture of life, then you cannot, for example, say that, oh, we should do everything to preserve a life in the womb, but once you are born, if you're poor, it's because your family and you make bad choices. Or if you can't afford an education, it's because you didn't do good enough and make good enough choices in your life to give you those opportunities. That's what's always funny, is that if it's a culture of life, if you're supposed to take care of life from the moment you can hear a heartbeat, then why is it that once it's not a big political issue anymore, or it doesn't get people's heartstrings into the seats or the pews of a church, it doesn't get them motivated at the voting booth, why then is suddenly the ideological position different, and suddenly people that need help are just lazy, or they made bad choices, or they're immoral? And so I wanted to hear sort of your thoughts on this idea about, pro-life, but also culture of life, and some of the problems with some of the arguments we hear about sort of pro-life positions. And so either of you, Kiana?
Yeah, sure. So Something I say a lot about Famalao'an Rights is that we are a pro-choice organization, not a pro-abortion organization. We believe that women should have the choice to decide if she is pregnant, what is the best route for her to take. That's our stance. So when you have pro-life in quotes, I'll put it, legislation like Bill 291 come out, what you're doing is you're saying to women, we don't want to give you that choice. And that's the problem with it, right? And so, yeah, you made a lot of good points about the kind of the discrepancies in the pro-life ideologies, right? And I think, Jane Flores mentioned it in her letter, like the problem with a lot of the conversation about reproductive health care and abortion is that you can say as much as you want that you want to protect life in the womb, that you are pro-life, that you care about life, that, it is the right thing to do. But when you take a closer look at what is happening in our island, when you look at the fact that so many foster kids are not leading, they're not being properly cared for, a problem comes up. And so what is essentially happening is you cannot say, that you are pro-life and that you care about, people, fetuses in the womb, and then kind of just turn a blind eye to the kids struggling in foster care, to the kids at schools who, are from bad environments and get sent to places like DYA. And we're so quick to judge those young people and maybe those old people, right? We have a very big homeless problem. And so you cannot choose to be pro-life only when it suits you. And I think that is the problem, because that you just, it's like, how can you kind of, scrape together that you are against abortions and that women should be forced to have babies, and then when they have babies and they're sent to foster care, you turn a blind eye. It's a moral discrepancy. And I don't know if Stephanie wants to talk more on that because she has a social work background.
Yes, definitely. So, I am an aspiring social worker, and that's something that the profession kind of stems from. It's the right for self-determination, the right to bodily autonomy. And so Bill 291 really just infringes on that right to make choices for themselves. And like Kiana had mentioned earlier, we are pro-choice. And that also comes from a social work perspective too, is that as a social worker, we want to ensure that our clients have access to all the resources, all the services, and all the education possible, so that way they can make their informed decision, not something that the government, mandates for them. Right. And, just going back to the foster, the foster child topic, right? Like one of the articles said, there's 550 foster children on island. How many licensed foster parents do we have on island? Is it enough? Probably not, because we've heard from the press conference around Bill 291, I believe it was the Harvest House. They said that we are in need of registered foster parents. And so how about those children who are not in those placements yet? How about them? And then like Kiana mentioned earlier, the homeless population on our island too. We see so many people quick to judge, oh, they're too lazy to work. Well, how about taking a step back and asking, well, do they have the education for these positions on island? Do they have the transportation to get to these job sites? And so I think, I don't know, but in my perspective, this bill, again, it's just to infringe on our rights, but there are other important legislation that need to be introduced to, help build the health of our community.
Yeah, and I think really like that conversation, if you are a pro-life person, I think you really have to ask yourself, if you are the pro-life person that is saying that, women shouldn't be able to get abortions, it's a question of, are you pro-life because it's simply easy to be pro-life for a fetus, that it's easier to be pro-life for a fetus than it is for, for a homeless person, for a foster kid, like, do you, it's that kind of question and that kind of conversation.
Thank you. And we're getting more and more comments we've got some people saying this is a black and white issue, and then others people saying it's not a black and white issue. And I think that's one of the things that makes this very, very difficult, is some people really want to just make it a black and white issue, simple. But it's not. It is as we've been framing it so far, is it sort of should a woman be powered to make choices for herself, even if, or should sort of society get to decide? And so it's very, very interesting to see people who are talking about, freedom of choice, freedom from masks, freedom from mandates. But then so many of them basically then say, well, when it comes to a woman's right to choose, then no, I don't believe in that. And so for me, this is why sort of people who think that everything's black and white and real simple, that's problematic, because then suddenly you feel super strongly 100% on these issues, and suddenly on this issue you're the other way around when it doesn't fit with how you see the world or how you want the world to be. And so and I think that's why because the issue is, this issue of abortion seems to be very politically potent for certain people, but it's disconnected from a larger feeling or larger sense of values about life, right? So it's kind of like, as somebody once sent to me, the Catholic Church believes that you have the right to life when you're conceived, and then when you're going to be murdered by the state or executed. But then the rest of the time, there's a lot of talk. There's some sort of humanitarian, efforts, some soup kitchens, some thrift stores. But actually, there's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of sort of difficulty, right? That sort of a lot of that only these people are good people, and not just. And I say this, the Catholic Church, because what we're talking about right now. But in a lot of ways, religion oftentimes is about deciding who's good and who's bad. Who's good and who's bad. And so it's unfortunate, because then this issue gets brought out in that way. But so I did want to ask, though, because one thing that isn't being discussed as much in this, but I've heard several people speaking out about the problems with it, is that people keep talking about this is a debate about abortion, but one of the most nefarious things about Bill 291 is the way that it empowers your everyday average citizen to then basically stalk and report on people in their community. Why isn't there a bill about this for littering? People complain about littering all the time. Why don't they do a bill like this that basically said you get a video of somebody littering, you can take them to court, you get $10,000? That would be probably a lot more helpful for the island. But and so can we talk about that? That sounds very scary, that idea. And when you think about a woman who's faced with a choice about her future and her life, and then now it's not just between her and the child, or her and her family even. Now she has to worry that people around her may know that she's pregnant, and so they may report on her. Oh my goodness. So can you please share, because I don't think that's getting enough attention, because we've already seen the fear that it's caused in places like Texas.
Right. Yeah, no, and I mean, how do I say, people who have been able to get abortions, before 2018, any person dealing with trying to get some form of reproductive healthcare here has always faced some kind of backlash from the community, whether that's, we had stories of people, who would protest outside the old abortion clinic and harass the women who were going in to get abortions. And then I did a Famalao'an Talks once where I mentioned that when women got abortions, they had to collect all this information on them, right? Where they're from, what village they're from, their age. And so if you were the only woman in Humatak who got an abortion, and you were age 23, that's on public record, and everyone would know, if you were pregnant and then you weren't, that was you. And so we see that a lot of these pro-life policies really infringe on kind of the privacy of, these women, these people who are looking to get reproductive health care. And, you know, that's something that we don't want to talk about, right? You know, you hear Heartbeat Act and you think, oh, this is a great thing. We're protecting the lives of the fetus. But when and why do the rights of a fetus override the rights of the woman is now becomes the question. Stephanie, I don't know if you want to talk more on this a little bit.
Yeah, you know, I also just want to just hop onto that too about how, you know, we're protecting the rights of the, you know, the unborn child, but how about protecting the rights of the mother? And you know, I want to speak about, you know, the sexual assault victims on island too. Again, in the newspapers, we've seen young victims becoming pregnant as a result of their attack, and so sorry, so we have to ask ourselves, like, are we, and you know, the bill makes no exception to sexual assault victims, which is highly concerning, really, because, you know, it's not only the 16 or, you know, the 12 to 14-year-olds, it's other victims too, and they don't have a say. You know, if this bill was implemented, then one, people are going to know that they were attacked, right? And two is that they have to live with that reminder for the whole 40 weeks, you know, the whole gestation period. And so I think that's really concerning, is that there's no exception for those victims. It's like, how are we going to empower them, you know, so they can start healing? Or how are we going to empower them to make choices, right? So yeah.
Sidus Masi. I'm checking out. We have lots and lots and lots of comments. We've got lots and lots of, because somebody says reproductive health care equals healthy women and healthy babies. And then also says the pro-choice does not mean anti-life. And then somebody else says castration is always an option instead of...
And vasectomies are also an option.
That's very true. That's very true. And then, so Kevin Camacho, if you are still watching, you know, if you would like to be on Fanachu for a future episode, because I know that you're really engaging with this issue, but from the other side of the issue, from the other side of the ideological perspective, I think I would love to invite you on for a future episode so we can unpack some of these issues. But the comments are very colorful and very exciting. Somebody says, why is it that pro-abortion people say that pro-life people have to be responsible for all of society's problems? It's like, well, if you're saying that life at this point is so precious that you have to take away a woman's liberties to protect it, then you also then have to basically, you then why, where does that passion go to once the baby is born?
Right.
Why is it that it's only precious to the extent of infringing on liberties when it's still in the womb? Why is it once it's born suddenly, whatever?
It's not our problem.
And so
exactly, yeah.
And so, okay, and so oh yes, Sidus Masi, oh Maneka. Maneka Flores says, if men could get pregnant, this would be such a non-issue. It is unfortunate that that's probably very true. Okay, so Muñeca de Oro, though, would like to know if you can expand on the issue of the litigation, the legal mechanisms that would need to be in place. Because how will this work? I know there's already been some problems in Texas, where basically the Texas law is designed to basically go against federal court opinions, so that the government is not supposed to have any role in it. But very recently, the police arrested a woman after, I believe, a healthcare worker reported that she had had an abortion, and so the cops arrested her, and then they released her. Once, of course, it was clear that part of this law is to get around Roe v. Wade, that the government is not supposed to get involved. It's supposed to be private citizens reporting on and suing private citizens. And so, oh, yes, I didn't read your entire comment because I find it very problematic. I find it very problematic that you feel that this issue is supremely important at one point, and then the rest of the time you're kind of dismissive. And so if you can explain why you feel like life only matters at this point, and it doesn't matter, and the rest of the time you can be dismissive of people, well, then I can understand your point. Then I can understand your point. And so, so I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Sort of how will this even work on Guam based on what we know from the bill that has been introduced?
Stephanie, I think you should go first on that one.
So, you know, in terms of the litigation, right, Kiana and I are both not lawyers, but, you know, going back to kind of the snitching clause that I think people were referencing it to, I think that we can use Texas as an example of how that woman was wrongfully arrested. And can you imagine how she felt at that time, knowing, you know, that she got an abortion, then immediately, you know, or not immediately after rather, but rather she got arrested because of something of her decision, right? And so how does, I want to know, like, how would a person feel knowing that they are arrested about something that they chose for their body, right? It's just infringing on their rights. Key, you want to hop onto that?
Yeah, and I think, you know, the question of how is it going to work in Guam, I think a better question would be, or I guess like the answer to that question was it shouldn't work in Guam, right? This bill, it's just so, and we've seen it in Texas, right? How it tries to get around Roe v. Wade, and you know, I don't doubt that if a case happened here, that would repeat itself. But again, it's just so kind of frustrating to see these pro-life policies, you know, be in place without, you know, kind of proper planning, I guess, right? And that's why we're having this question right now, is because it wasn't thought through, right? Whether you want to call it an election scheme, or if you want to call it whatever you want to call it, it didn't think itself all the way through, and that's where the stem of the problem comes from.
Yeah, it definitely seems part of sort of like a long-term process to kind of find a way around Roe versus Wade, or you know, or basically lead to the dissolution of Roe versus Wade, which, I mean, and I do have to acknowledge that this is a complicated issue, because I mean, for me, somebody who believes that Guam should be sovereign, that Guam should be decolonized, and then it is difficult then, because part Roe v. Wade, from some people's perspective, comes in sort of like a colonial mandate. Basically, the US has decided that this is the way things are, and Guam just has to accept it, which is why the champion of the anti-abortion law that was passed in 1990, or put in law in 1990, Bel Areola, Anita Areola's mother, you know, she made the case that Guam should have its own sovereignty to protect itself from sort of these progressive ideas in the United States. And, you know, and so I definitely acknowledge that as somebody who talks about these issues all the time. That's why when somebody says that this is black and white and simple and easy, it's like, no, it's not. It's not, because there, and so but anyways, that's part of the interesting thing about this discussion, is that even though from one side of me in the Bel Areola, Anita Areola debate, one side of me felt strongly with Anita Areola sort of defending women's rights to choose, but then on the other side, part of me was like, well, I also don't like the way this comes in as a federal decision that Guam has to sort of abide by. But when you weigh it out, for me, culturally, from what I know about Chamorro culture and what I would want for the community on Guam, I would want women to be empowered about this issue. And so, but anyways, some more sort of a muddiness on this issue. And so I wanted to ask the question because it has been pointed out regularly that there's no doctors performing abortions on Guam right now. And so is this bill not really an issue for that reason? Or what is the thinking behind this bill, given that there's no one actively performing abortions on Guam right now?
Thanks, Dr. Maggette. So yeah, during the press conference for the introduction of the bill, the sponsor cited that it's just a preventative measure because Guam has been actively looking for an abortion doctor to perform this procedure. But like we talked about earlier, this is just a ploy to tug at the heartstrings of the public to create the narrative that we have to protect the unborn child. And again, just asking ourselves the question of how can we protect the mother, basically. But yeah, so like you are right, sir, there's no doctor on Guam to perform abortions, but I'm not too sure, right? I've been hearing rumors that there's some doctors on island, I guess like a naval hospital. I could be wrong, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I know Director Flores called this legislation moot, right? In that first letter. But I think the whole reason why we're talking about this, even though there are no, abortion doctors performing abortions here, and we obviously have like we call them back alley, backyard abortions, right? But I think the reason why this bill has become such a hot issue so quickly is because it's not something that's new. There have been so many instances in Guam's history of anti-abortion laws that have tried to control the bodies of women, and yeah, it's just so even though there are no abortion doctors here, what this bill does is it's adding to this narrative that abortion is morally wrong and we shouldn't have it on island. Abortion doctors shouldn't come here. And so it's really just adding to kind of the stigma, and it's creating a negative view on access to reproductive health care. And by the way, I want to mention that when we say reproductive health care, we don't just mean abortion. We're talking about access to easy access to things like birth control, to things like proper sexual education. And I've met a lot of the pro-life people who also don't support things like birth control, and they say, oh, let's just do family planning. But reproductive health care is an all-encompassing thing. It's not just abortion.
Oh, thank you, Sidus Masi. Yeah, I mean, it's such a difficult issue to discuss, because I think we can, when even just sort of some of the comments that are coming in from people, I think former Senator Regine Bisco-Lee basically reminded that, if you empower women to make choices about their lives, they will live more confidently, right? And even so, and you show women that they are supported in all ways, not that you are only supported if you don't make a mistake, don't get abused, don't get raped. You're only important if these things don't happen to you. And so I think that's one thing that there's just this major struggle about what is the role of a woman in society. Because a man sort of has this autonomy, he has control over so many things, but a woman, there's still these feelings that a woman exists for society, that there's certain things that she doesn't get to have a choice about. Society gets to choose these things for her. And that's beyond a lot of the discussion that happens, but you can feel it in the way a lot of people talk about this issue. So I do want to give a chance, though, to talk about the event that is happening on the 27th. And so, and I did there was some comments about sort of if there could be a call-in option to Fanachu event. Maybe eventually one day could actually have that. But for now, if there's an issue that you feel strongly about and you're willing to talk about it reasonably and rationally, then I'm always open to having people on. I bring on people who I don't necessarily agree with about everything all the time, but as long as somebody is open to sort of discussing it. Oh, yes, there is a baby cooing in the background. And, and if, and I love that baby more than anything. But if my girlfriend had not felt like she was ready, or there was something wrong, and I told her it is her choice, it's because at the end of the day, a woman who feels empowered and supported and protected will be a stronger person in society. That's what I personally believe about that. But it does, I agree, Kevin, that it makes it very interesting, the discussion, that you can hear a baby in the background. So Kiana or Stephanie, let us talk about sort of this demonstration that's happening next week.
Yeah, of course. Before I talk about that, so yesterday, actually, we had a sign making event that we called out to the public. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who donated cash, who donated supplies, poster boards, paint, things like that. We had a really good turnout, and we were able to crank out, a lot of signs that we're going to be distributing at this protest. And so on April 27th, which is this coming Wednesday, we will be in front of the Guam Congress Building from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And I know there was some confusion because originally it was on the 28th, but we decided to move it to the 27th because April 27th is also Denim Day. And Denim Day is essentially a day to stand in solidarity with sexual assault survivors. And so we asked the public if you can come in denim to do that. We know that Bill 291 doesn't have any, exceptions for victims of sexual assault. And so we thought it was a great day to have this protest against Bill 291. The senators will also be in the session, so they will be in the building, and we will be standing right outside to, loudly voice our opinion that we believe that Bill 291 should not become public law. Signs will be distributed at the event. Yes, I already mentioned that. So we made some signs that say blank for choice. So we will be handing those out with some markers so you can put it on. It can say Famalao'an for choice, students for choice, whoever group you are representing for choice. And it is going to be a peaceful protest. Anyone that is engaging in violence or violence, whether that be physical or any other form of violence, will be escorted off the premises. And so, this rally is very important to Famalao'an Rights. It is the first one we are, ever hosting in conjunction with Guam People for Choice. And, once you get there, I will be the kind of MC of the rally, and then we'll have some speakers at the beginning and the end. I know Jane Flores and her daughter Juliana will be there, attorney Vanessa Williams. And so we're really asking the public to, as much as we appreciate everyone kind of, resharing the posts and kind of being woke on Instagram, please come out and, be there physically to show our government that this is something that we truly care about, and that we're not just, upset at on social media, that this is a very real thing with very real consequences. And so, that's why we're holding this protest and distributing signs, and, we're just going to be outside having a peaceful protest. So again, it's on April 27th, which is this coming Wednesday. If you can come in denim, please do, because, it's in front of the Guam Congress Building from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And like we said here, Guam has a right to reproductive health care. So come out and help us fight for that right.
Stephanie, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just we hope to see you guys there. We would be remiss if we didn't thank our partners for helping us with this event, like MCCA, Numa Loa, Independence Guahan, Alter Ego, the Bureau of Women's Affairs, of course, Guam People for Choice, Muscada Collective, and the Souls for Student Alliance. So we are really looking forward to the participants that we're going to see on Wednesday, and please come out and help us fight for the right.
No, Sidzus Masin. This has definitely been a very engaging discussion. It's got a lot of people fired up in the comments. I can't even keep track of the comments. I think there's like more than 70 comments at this point. And a mix. Some people not engaged in this. Some people very engaged in this. And so I did want to sort of ask as a final question for the both of you, and you can answer this however you'd like. But how would you respond? So how do you respond? Because many people who have been sort of commenting negatively or critically in the on this stream have basically taken the position that culturally or definitely religiously, They are against abortion in all forms and against all of this stuff. And so we've had some conversations about what we feel about that, or what you may see as issues that gray this, or make it so that you feel that another position is better and more important. But I wanted to give you just a final chance just to share, like, what would you say to somebody who is against this for very firm religious or cultural reasons, that they feel that 291 is saving life, protecting the island? I mean, there was also a comment that mentioned that, like, there's the Chamorro genocide because of all the aborted babies and stuff like that. And so I wanted to give both of you a chance if you just wanted to share some closing thoughts.
Oh, Stephanie, if you want to go first, go ahead.
Yeah, so just, Catholic teachings on abortion has been changing over time. And so I think my one thing that I hope you can take away is that true Catholicism is really based on the deep respect for each individual and how they choose, and their conscience when they're making these moral decisions. So just respect for one another.
Yeah, and
Kiana, go ahead.
For me, I always tell people, if you're pro-life, that's fine. But the moment that, you kind of try to infringe on the rights of others, or, because you can be pro-life for yourself. If you say, I don't want to get an abortion, then by all means, don't get one. But the moment you try to, mandate someone else's body is when it becomes problematic. So, just know that you can be pro-life and still respect the choices of the people around you.
Again, I think that's a very important point, is that, and that's why sort of it's important to have these types of discussions that can inform our democracy. And what's important is, because what we see in this issue for me is that a lot of influence from stateside trends, whether for pro-choice or anti-choice, we see sort of the conversations in the states influencing us. So that's why this bill, for example, is kind of just cut and paste from the states. So it's just imported right over here. But it's important that we have a discussion here, that those who feel strongly against abortion express themselves, and that we can be accountable here, because we share this island. We share it, and religion is a part of it, but religion isn't all of it. The government is part of it. The government isn't all of it at the same time. But it's important that we have that ability at some points to kind of filter out the big conversations that are happening in the States or elsewhere, and we look at each other here. And Stephanie, I like what you said about sort of respect. And it's that idea of sort of religion, as being sort of, is it something in which we all sort of shout and yell about, or is it sort of the quiet conversation with your conscience and your faith? And yeah, because when this, it's funny because abortion has only become more politicized on Guam as it became politicized in the States. And so that's, for me, sort of a red flag too, is that only when this issue comes because of people consuming media from the States, hearing about it from the States, and then getting sort of worked up about it, that's a problem for me, is that we need to look at each other here and talk to each other here about this issue, and come to our own consensus about what we feel. And if we can do that, I mean, and the thing about a democracy is sometimes you don't always get your way, but you have to push for what you believe. And part of that is the ability to discuss it with others and to respect others in that, and then find a way which will support the most people. And so, and that's why for me, for me, my position is always, support women, especially after thousands of years of patriarchal bullshit. Support women, because your average woman deals with a multitude of things that your average man doesn't. Get rid of as many of those things as possible. So since they are the primary caregivers of life of the next generation, so then support them and take care of them. Do not create more bullshit for them to deal with. That is my personal opinion. It does not reflect anybody else, but that's how I make my choices. As somebody who is privileged as a man, who's privileged as a light-skinned Chamorro person, as not a Catholic on Guam, I say support women, support women in whatever way we can. And so, Sidus, Masi, Kiana, and Stephanie, it was a great conversation. I do also even want to thank those who were commenting, including those who may have been critical of the discussion. I appreciate you commenting. I appreciate you expressing. It's important for the democratic space that people can express, but then we also then have to deal with some of these issues that are involved. That is it for today's Fanachu episode. Just a reminder to everyone, April 27th, 4 to 6 p.m.
Guam Congress
outside the Guam Congress Building. Honggan, Sidus Masi. All right. Makpuesti na episode Pago Fanachu. Adios. Esta ki manadli hitatlu. Until we see each other.